Hello and welcome to Frost Over the World. Later in the programme, the Olympic champion, Carl Lewis, a great talker as well, and a look at the chaos in Bahrain. But we begin, of course, with Libya, the no-fly zone, and its implications in particular on civilian refugees. Colonel Gaddafi had warned that if he fell, thousands of people from Libya will invade Europe. A taster of the crisis to come came this week as a boat with Tunisian migrants sank in rough seas, killing 35 people on board. With Western military action imminent, it's bound to get worse. So, how should Europe respond to this crisis? Joining me now from Valletta is the Maltese Prime Minister, Lawrence Gonzi. And here in the studio is the Director of Policy at the Refugee Council of Britain, Jonathan Ellis. Welcome to you both. Turning first of all today to you, Prime Minister, one overnight question, as it were. Were you pleased about the UN decision about the no-fly zones being legal and allowed? Will that help the general situation, do you think?
Yes, I hope it will. I mean, we are right next to a country which has been going through a difficult time. We're close to the people that are going through difficult circumstances. We've been insisting with everybody concerned, with the Libyan authorities in particular, that the violence needs to stop. And I'm hoping that the decision taken by the Security Council yesterday night will help for the situation to be resolved once and for all in the best interest of everyone concerned in the region.
And do you think that could happen quite quickly?
Well, that's very difficult to assess at this point in time. The situation keeps changing from moment to moment. We are in a situation now which is extremely delicate, so it's very difficult for any one of us to say whether this will actually help to sort the situation in the short term or in the long term. I'm just hoping that the humanitarian dimension of this situation needs to be addressed and resolved as quickly as possible. There are lives that are being lost there. There is a humanitarian crisis which we have been witnessing in these past weeks, and it needs to be resolved in the best interest of everybody. This is not getting anywhere. It is not benefiting anyone at all. And Malta appeals to Gaddafi and to the regime to stop this immediately and to stop the loss of life. We need to get the region settled, and we need to give the people on the ground what they deserve. They are fighting for their rights, they want a change, and we need to help the Libyan people to achieve their ambitions and their aspirations, like anyone else who lives in a free world.
And let's turn to Jonathan here, who we introduced earlier. Jonathan, do you think that countries like Italy and Malta, but all the other countries that are nearer to Libya than the ones that are far away, should they be refusing entry, do you think? Is that a legitimate thing to do, or should they be cooperating more?
Oh, I think that it's really important that there's full cooperation. To turn a boat back with refugees who may have a well-founded fear of persecution without checking first is a clear contravention of the 1951 Refugee Convention. You know, the internationally signed convention across the world of how we seek to protect refugees. So I think it's so important to see who is coming. But I think a vital point is that Europe can't look to the states of Malta, Italy, Greece to take all the responsibility. You know, Europe talks of solidarity. There has to be solidarity across all the member states. After the Kosovo crisis, there was a temporary protection directive, sharing responsibility, allowing access. The European Union needs to dust that down and share responsibility. This is a defining moment. The people of North Africa are speaking, but Europe needs to act together in solidarity and not just look for the southern European states to take all of the responsibility.
Yes. Not just Malta and not just Italy and not just Greece, but it has to be a Europe-wide I think it's collaboration.
Fundamentally important. In Libya, we know from the United Nations there are 8,000 registered refugees, 3,000 asylum seekers already in Libya. We look for the European Union to look at resettlement, airlifting those refugees out of very dangerous situations into Europe. And at the moment, not one single member state has offered one single place for resettled refugees. This is a humanitarian crisis, as the Prime Minister rightly says. We see the no-fly zone. We now need refugee action to save those people now.
Prime Minister, how many people from Libya do you think will be looking for a home in Europe?
That is very difficult to calculate or be specific about. I mean, the figures we know is that about 250,000 moved out of Libya into the Tunisian or Egyptian borders during the height of the crisis. And that number might include Libyans and might include people from other nationalities who are living in Libya. So it is difficult for us to calculate what the precise number will be. What we are certain about is that if the situation on the ground continues to get more difficult with loss of life and more injuries, and with the general situation getting worse, then there will be a flight of people which will definitely not only move into the Tunisian and Egyptian borders, but will continue to start to cross the Mediterranean. Now we have to look also at what has been happening in Italy and in Lampedusa, with people, Tunisians, crossing from Tunisia onto Lampedusa. So we're actually facing an unstable situation in Tunisia, the situation in Libya, and also what's happening in Egypt. This, if you add all this to what we've been living through in the past years now, Malta has been facing the flow of immigration coming from the Horn of Africa mainly, Somalia, Eritreans, people who never really wanted to come to Malta, but who ended up on our island by chance, because we saved their lives, because they were in a boat that was about to drown, because they asked for our help, and we went out to help them. And all through these years, we've been asking for support from the European Union and from the international community.
What would you say, looking at the situation, you would like them to do practically to help? What can these other countries, they see the problems that face Malta and Italy,
Sure.
What can they actually, apart from saying we'd like to help, how would they help?
We need to share responsibility. I made reference to the Temporary Protection Directive. That needs to be reenacted, sharing responsibility. And Europe needs to find a way that it's safe for refugees to come to Europe. And I have to say, things like the Italian government pushing refugees back to Libya before this crisis erupted. Libya had never signed the 51 Refugee Convention. You know, transferring the problem, the challenge, back to North Africa is not the problem. Europe needs to have a strategic, coordinated approach. The European Union needs to act in solidarity, doing it together.
Doing it together. Prime Minister, that's very much what you were saying in slightly different words, but saying the same thing as Jonathan there. Acting together. Europe has got to act together, and you've got to hope that when you go back to your office, the phones will be ringing with prime ministers of every country in Europe ringing up and volunteering for help. Do you see this crisis and the refugee crisis as it affects Malta? Do you see this situation going on, Prime Minister, for some time, or can there be a solution more quickly?
No, unfortunately, I'm not that optimistic, although I would love to be. What I can say is I think there is heightened awareness. I think the European Union realizes that there is a human tragedy which continues to grow, and the danger that it will really grow to enormous proportions. In our last summit, which we had last week, the summit conclusions made it very clear that we need to take the necessary steps to prepare ourselves for this, and that support needs to be given to those countries that find themselves in difficult situations like Malta.
We thank you very much for joining us, and you, Jonathan, too, of course, and thank you for the very good points you've both been making. Thank you very much. 3 weeks ago, regular viewers may remember, I spoke to the Foreign Minister of Bahrain, Khaled Al Khalifa. At that time, he promised a more open approach to the protesters in his country.
Now this is again, we are doing it, and we are moving forward with the promises and real promises to talk to everybody in Bahrain, talk to the people, answer all the demands, and discuss them in a very genuine way. And we're looking forward to do it very soon.
Strong words there from the Foreign Secretary. Well, this week, far from having a discussion with the protesters, the Bahraini government invited troops from Saudi Arabia to help in a crackdown to break up the protests, quite a violent one. There were reports, in fact, of several deaths. So what is going on in the tiny Gulf state, and who is really pulling the strings? I'm joined here in the studio by Britain's former ambassador to Bahrain, Robin Lamb. Robin, welcome.
Thank you.
Right now, the situation has changed, and now the hardliners seem to be winning, and you would presumably condemn the deaths, recent deaths. What has happened? What has happened?
First of all, there was, I think that there was a very serious mistake when the security forces initially moved on to the Pearl roundabout and used live rounds. That, I think, was, I don't understand how that came about. It seemed out of character with the King and the Crown Prince. And it was not only regrettable, but clearly a mistake as well from their point of view, because it embittered the conflict. After that, and you've seen the statement, you've just shown us the statement by the Foreign Minister, the Crown Prince Salman announced willingness to conduct a dialogue with the opposition and invited them to come forward and take part in that. Now that has proved difficult to achieve. The opposition have gone very firm on a number of demands, and the picture's been further complicated by the fact that the opposition itself is not monolithic. You have the majority Al-Wifaq party, with previously with 18 seats in the lower house of parliament and representing the majority of the Shia population. But you also have the more radical Al-Haq movement, who refused to take part in the parliamentary process in 2006 and are now calling for a republic. I don't think Wifaq calls for a republic. It calls for a constitutional monarchy and a more representative parliament.
But it seems as though the Bahrainis invited the Saudis in, or did the Saudis just really come uninvited and are determined to not allow any democracy or anything like it anywhere near their borders, and so that they are really pressing hard?
I think one would, first of all, I would take your question, I'll get to it if I may, but I think one does need to look at the sequence of events on the ground first as well. They had demonstrations in the Pearl roundabout. These were not as contained as the ones in Egypt, in Cairo and Tahrir Square, for example. They did spill over and people began to, I mean, there were people I've been in touch with who felt very threatened when they passed the Pearl roundabout. Then after that, they began to set up roadblocks elsewhere as well. So one would understand in that circumstance, in any country, that a police force would be asked to clear the area so that normal life would continue. And I've had a lot of contacts from friends of all nationalities and faiths in Bahrain who have been very distressed by what's been going on.
But aren't they more distressed by the murder of innocent civilians?
Well, they are actually been very distressed by the behaviour of some of the protesters, to be honest, as well.
But they haven't been killing people.
They have.
How many?
Policemen, the total number of policemen being killed is 4 over the last couple of weeks, usually by dint of protesters driving their cars into crowds of policemen and running them over. And that has happened on more than one occasion.
But how many protesters have been killed?
About the same number, I believe.
Only 4?
That's what I'm told, yes. Now there is, unfortunately probably too late for now, but the Bahraini government have put out a detailed statement on the action they've taken. But it's only come my way this morning, so it's a bit late in the day.
What's going to happen now? What's going to happen now? Is Saudi Arabia going to take over, basically?
No, it's not. I mean, we must point out, I think, that the Saudi force and UAE forces who've come over have not been in the lead. They're not conducting the security operations, the police operations against the protesters and the demonstrators. They are in the background. They are guarding the oil refinery and other facilities. They're in a static role. They're not in the lead role. That is for the Bahraini security forces. So I don't see them, taking over. This is a Bahraini issue. It's a Bahraini-led response. And what is happening now is that the Bahraini government are trying to resume the political dialogue. They have told me that they recognise there is no security solution. It is not. This cannot be solved by security. There needs to be a political solution. And what they want to get back to is to political dialogue.
Do you believe that?
I do believe that.
Well, thank you very much indeed for being with us today.
Thank you.
It's just under 500 days to the 2012 London Olympic Games, and indeed tickets are already on sale. Though not all of them, that's a separate controversy. Joining me now is one of the most famous athletes of all time. Yes, you've guessed it. American legend, 9-time Olympic gold medalist. You've got it. Carl Lewis. Carl was crowned Olympic athlete of the 20th century. At his peak, in his early 30s, he ran the 100 metres sprint in 9.86 seconds, a world record at the time. In fact, he still holds the indoor long jump record. Carl, welcome back to London.
Great, thank you very much.
We're delighted you're here, and you're helping out on the Olympic Games at the moment.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. It's kind of interesting. It seems like Beijing was like 3 weeks ago, and now we're 500 days, less than 500 days now, to the next Olympics. And I think London's going to be wonderful. It's a great city, especially for us in the States, because it's so close, it's accessible, and a lot of Americans are going to watch, and I think it's going to be very exciting.
And in terms of your fantastic career, what was the moment when you said you were a scrawny kid at one stage, and then suddenly you filled out and you were on your way? When did that magic moment come?
Well, for me, it's interesting, and it's probably the most amazing athletic moment of my life. I was in a competition in Memphis, Tennessee, in a year in the 70s,
Yeah.
and I was 16 years old, and my personal best was 24 feet in the long jump. And that meet, I went out, I became national age group champion, and I jumped 25.9 at 16 years old. And it was just almost 8 meters. Right. And so it was such an amazing day. It just transformed my life. And from that point on, I said, look, I can actually go to the Olympics. I can do this thing. You know, the dream might be able to come true. And
you got to meet your dad, who was a mentor and introduced you to Jesse Owens?
Yes, I met Jesse when I was a young kid, and excuse me, and so my father always talked about, he knew Jesse Owens, and please, your dads always tell you they know everything, and I'm like, Dad, you are such a liar. And so finally, I went to a track meet in Philadelphia, and he said, you know, Jesse Owens, I'd like to introduce you to my son, and Jesse was very polite, looked at my father, like he had 200 heads, like he didn't know him. But then my father said, wait, I'm on the spot now. So he talked about some times when he was in Chicago as a kid, and Jesse remembered that. He's like, oh, I remember that. Yeah, I was a little kid, blah, blah, blah. And he remembered there were 5 kids or something, and it was really kind of amazing. And so I sat there and I listened to him, and I remembered so much about him, about how he treated young people. But the biggest thing I remember is his voice. He had such an amazing voice. It was booming, and when he told stories, he just transformed everyone in the room. And I just felt like, I want to be like that, you know. The greatest
athlete in 1936 and so on, wasn't he? I mean, did he give you any advice?
What he did is that I was a little kid. I was a late bloomer, and I told people all the time, you know, kids say, oh, I'm short. I said, trust me, you still have a chance. And he talked about doing the best you can and being the best you can be. That's something I learned from him. He talked about that all the time. I met him that time, and I heard him speak 2 other times. And he always talked about that very message. And what's interesting is that, you know, years later, I competed in the same events. And one of the great things is that what people don't realize is that Jesse had this amazing thing with Hitler and won these gold medals for the Olympics. But he was shortly thereafter banned. He lost his amateur status. And he also went to his ticker tape parade party in the service elevator. I mean, he was not allowed to go up the regular because he was a black man there. So therefore, he was treated better at the Olympic Games, you know, in Hitler's time than he was when he came back home. So it was really an interesting thing.
You know, Sammy Davis, too, couldn't stay in Miami in the same hotel where he was performing.
Right.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing that we don't think about. And so years later, when I was at the Olympics, I remember I was at the games, and one of the guys finished it, some reporter said, yeah, you know, you might have got the 4 gold medals, but you'll never be Jesse Owens. And I said, you know, you're absolutely right. I'm going up the front elevator.
Brilliant. And your family moved you, particularly your mother, moved you out of the South into the North, to New Jersey, right, hoping that it would be a more tolerant racial atmosphere. Yeah,
actually, that's it. They were heavily involved in the civil rights movement. Dr. King baptized my brothers, and we were family friends, and they wanted to get out of that, and because they fought the good fight for 10 years, and they were like, we're tired. But what's funny is that we moved to Willingboro, New Jersey, and then we moved right into the middle of a civil rights issue in terms of housing. So it was a guy trying to get into that township. We were, you know, after World War II, there were 3 towns that came out, the Levitt towns. It was Levittown, New York, Levittown, Pennsylvania, and then Willingboro was the 3rd. Well, the guy Levitt was a racist. He did not want black people or people of color. So therefore, someone had to sue to get people of color into that town. And of course, that's where we moved. So, so we didn't get away anyway.
So you were straight into that. Which is more difficult, getting to the top or staying at the top?
It depends on what you believe. You know, my thing was I never wanted to be at the top. I wanted to be the best, and I wanted to make a lot of money. You know, it was straight away. So the best I could be, and so I always wanted to be the best, and then he transformed that into saying the best that you can be. So the challenges was always to be the best. Just to give you an example, in the '84 Olympics, in the 100 meters, you know, I won that race and won by the largest margin in history and had a great race. And I finished, I ran up and I saw him right past the finish line, and I ran up to him, and he looked at me and said, you know, if you had driven out of the blocks, you would have set the world record. And it just kind of stunned me. And he said, get over here, and hugged me. But the message was clear, that it's always about your best. Let's always try to be the best you can be.
How long can the world, the great athletes of the world, go on improving the times for races? I mean, take what Usain Bolt has now done, what, 9.58 in the 100. Now, I mean, can we go on forever, getting faster and faster, doing it? Will someday someone run the 100 in 8?
Oh yeah. It's going to. People are always going to beat the records. I
they
think
really are. There's no limit to it.
There's no limit. I mean, we're not going to see it, but there's no limit, and I think that's a great thing. And you know, there's a saying that says you own the medals, but you rent the records, and I totally believe that. Yeah. You rent the records. I mean, some of them that I had are gone. And some that are still here will be gone someday, but they can't take those medals away.
What do you feel is the best thing to do about drugs in athletics? I mean, some people say it's better to just legalize them and go with it. Other people say never, never, never. What should be done about drugs in the sport, in athletics particularly?
I'm in the never, never, never category.
Right.
It's really strictly because the whole point of sports is to find out who's the best, and drugs does not determine that. I think if I look from an American perspective, I think it's the adults that are causing the problems now. Why there's such an explosion, because you know we need to not only teach our children to stay away from them, but also teach our kids what sports are about. You know, it's not really about winning. It's about fun and about being the best you can be and about achievement. But we're teaching people kids about turning pro, about being rich, about being a star. And I think that we need to change that dynamic. We're always going to have cheaters because we've always had in the history of our world. But if we give up the good fight and say, oh, it's okay to have it, then our best athletes are not going to be in it. Because the vast majority of athletes have never been on drugs, will not get on drugs. And if the sport is about drugs, many of them will not even compete.
But you're doing new things all the time. I read somewhere that you're going to do a marathon. Are you going to do a marathon?
Yeah, yes, I am. I'm going to do, when I turn, in my 50th year, I'm going to do a marathon. And unfortunately, I've told too many people, so I can't back out. You know, but everyone's like saying, oh, I'll train with you. I'm like, train? What, are you kidding me? I mean, I'm going to go give them my credit card and say, leave the lights on. I mean, I'm just going to finish the thing, you know?
Oh, that's really exciting. Well, it's really exciting having you here, too. And here's to our next conversation. And Carl, thanks a million.
Oh, thank you very much. Wonderful. Big fan. It's such a pleasure to be here.
And vice versa. Carl Lewis there. He's as good a talker as he is a runner. That's it for this week's programme. My thanks to all my guests. Do join me again for the next Frost Over the World.